Okay, so let's talk about the world of transaxle Porsches, in particular the 924, 944, 968, 928, and everything we think we need to know about restoration and projects. This is going to be a good one, so stick around. Welcome to Witty 924. So welcome back everybody, and this episode is one that I've been very excited about doing, mainly because I've taken many of the steps that we're going to talk about today with my 924, and that is projects and restoration. And I wanted to give maybe a little bit of detail about how I decided upon what I wanted to do to my 924 and share some of the steps that ultimately you might take as you think about maybe a project car or restoration of a Porsche that you might be considering. Okay, so let's look at the cars that fall into the category generally for Porsche when you consider a project or a restoration car. Of course, the 911 is generally top of mind and is generally the car that everyone would like to gravitate towards because of all of the history and generally the investment stroke pricing around 911s in general. Not to say that they're all investments. I think that's one thing you should always start right at the beginning, is to think no car really truly is an investment. It's very rare that the amount of money that you will put into a car, and that's everything from putting fuel in, insurance, all of that scope of budget that you will put into a car is very rarely achieved back and some, if that makes sense. So I think it's fair to say, as we talk about restoration and we talk about projects, don't confuse that with the word investment, because I think that should really stay well away from projects and restoration. So with that, what we'll do is we'll park the 911 aside and look at really the front engine rear wheel drive Porsches, the transaxle Porsches, which they're commonly known as, and they are the 924, the 944, the 968 family, and we will touch on that a little bit more in a moment, and the 928, which is the bigger brother to all of those. And I think as you really look at that lineup, some of the questions you need to ask yourself are aligned to these three areas, and these are the three areas that I think are most important as you consider any type of project car or restoration on a car, certainly aligned to the older Porsches. So the three categories, and they're not in any particular order, but I think they're very much interlinked as you start to weigh up and go through the process of what you might consider doing to a car as you think of, I want to buy this for a project or restoration. So the three categories are time, effort, and cost. Let's start with time. I think this is a really important one because, as with any type of project work or restoration work, the excitement of obtaining something that might have been a child dream, something that you've always wanted, you've wanted to get your hands on, you weren't maybe in a position financially to get it, or you just didn't have the setup that you thought might accommodate taking on a car for this type of work, means sometimes the time element gets forgotten about. And what I mean by that is that you make the purchase with all that excitement, you found something, you go for it, and then it's there. And maybe you haven't done all the thinking and the detail about what you truly want to do with this car. It's already there, it's in your ownership, and now you've got to consider the time element of how much time you're prepared to put into this and how long it's going to take and why. These are really important steps that you should really consider before you even make the initial purchase. So with that said, if you are considering a car right now, really set out how long you think you want the project or the restoration to last. So is it 6 months? Is it a year? Is it 2 years? Is it 3 years? Because time really does mount up as you get stuck into these projects. And when you start unpicking all the different details of the car, you tend to find that scope creep becomes overwhelming. And if any of you have ever done things in terms of projects in all walks of life, scope creep is generally your number one enemy when you're considering time. So with that, I think it's really, really important that you just set yourself the goal of how much time you're prepared to spend on it, and also why. So if it's something you're going to take on and you're going to be aiming for a time frame, be it a car show, be it, I don't know, a trip away in the car, or just getting something complete that you can then show to your friends, then whatever the goal needs to be, it needs to be. The second area that really is important is effort. And when I say effort, I mean how much you as the individual are prepared to do on the car yourself versus how much you're prepared to give someone else to do it for you. So how much you will pay them. And again, this is a really, really important piece, because as you look at the project, your own knowledge of the car, or what you're prepared to learn about the car as you go through the steps of working on it, and the tools available to you, will make a very, very decisive moment in terms of a decision about how much effort you will put into the project. That ultimately has a knock-on effect to the time. So you can start to see these things are very, very much intrinsically attached to each other. So I think from that perspective, just understanding how much you're prepared to put your own skin in the game, getting wrenching, hammering, swearing, all these things that come with working on great classic cars is really important, versus how much you want someone else to do it. Now, again, there's two ways to, I guess, to weigh that up, and this is how I went through this bit, is I wanted to learn. So if you're in that frame of mind of learning more about the car with guidance from manuals and so on, then you take step by step. You're going to ultimately take longer than paying someone who's a professional who knows what they're doing, but you don't get the satisfaction of you did it, you created it, you made it, and now it's working type thing. So I think there's a bit there to weigh up around the amount of effort. And then the final piece, which I've left to last, but again, it's not necessarily in order, is cost. And you can see that cost is absolutely attached to time and absolutely attached to effort. Now, cost can be really split into two parts, and that is how much you're prepared to spend on the car itself in terms of buying the vehicle and all the parts that it needs to be restored to a level that you think in your mind you're happy with. That's a really important piece. There is the value of the car as you buy it, and projects can range from all different levels depending on the model you look at, whether it's a 924, 944, 968, 928. The entry level in terms of a restoration and project are definitely different. You might find some projects that really do need professional work, really professional setups in terms of workshops and all of that good stuff. So you've got to be really clever in your thinking of how much you want to spend in terms of time, effort, which then ultimately drives the cost you're going to enter in at. And that's a really, really important piece. The second part of the cost sort of ties very much to the effort, which is how much you are going to do. So there is a cost attached to maybe tools that you have to buy, bits that you, again, might sit out a scope creep, because it although you try 99% to keep everything within the budget, there will always be the additions that just fall outside. Now, the final piece is, again, the budget that you might pay someone. So if you are going to ask someone to, I don't know, paint the car, as a good example, then you've got to build that cost in. So those three areas, time, effort, and cost, are three things that if you were to put a project plan together, for instance, namely you pick the car that you think you want to own and do all the work on to make it a project and a restoration, then the three categories that you list out is the time, the effort, and the cost. And with those in mind, then you can start to actually set staging. So staging for me was really in three parts. So stage one is find a project car based on the three areas above, and a project car that you either want to own or you want to restore to a point in time that allows you to move it on. Because that's again, it's a really important piece, because the amount of money you might put into something you want to own and keep versus something you just want to bring back to life and move on are very different. When I went through the steps for my 924, my thought was I want to have ownership of this car once it's complete, and I want to own it and enjoy everything that I put into it, effort, time, blood, sweat, tears, money, all of that good stuff. Just enjoy what the ownership experience was of the 924 when I guess it was way back in the 80s when it first came out, as in my car, so a 1984 car. So now again, you could be in the type of frame where you say, actually, I'm just going to go and buy one that's already complete and I'm going to drive it. Now that sort of defeats the object of what this podcast really is about, and that's taking on a project and taking on a restoration that you ultimately want to drive yourself. Now the other part really is, once you've decided about the car you want to purchase, or the model I should say, you go out and you find what you think might be a good fit. So when I was searching for mine, I was quite fortunate at the time. I bought mine in 2017. It was about four or so years ago. And there seemed to be quite a few options in the marketplace. So it was pretty buoyant. There was quite a few cars around that were what I would call in running order, but definitely needed work if you were going to consider long-term ownership. So that's where I landed with mine. I wanted something that did drive, that did work, but I knew that I would have to spend money to get it back to a good known state, and that money would be spent across three key areas. That would be the mechanicals, the exterior appearance, and the interior appearance. All three areas really were a part of the plan. Now, when I bought mine, I set myself a 3-year limit. It wasn't driven by anything in particular other than that I wanted to put time, effort and money over a longer period rather than a big lump sum right at the beginning. So maybe it was just a better way for me to finance the whole build and project and restoration from my perspective, but it also allowed me to learn while I went through the work that I did on my car, because that was one of the main goals of the project I took on with my 924 was I wanted to learn and I wanted to understand all the component pieces, how it all worked, and understand how I could fix it. So when I do take it on longer trips, I generally know straight off the bat if something's amiss. I know where to look and I know how to do it and fix it, potentially at the roadside. And also the other caveat was I wanted to race the car on hill climbs and sprints, so mainly classic ones around the country. So those are still my driving goals now, even though the car's virtually completed. So these are the sort of things that, as you consider what your project restoration is and why, these are some of the things, ideas that might be floating around in your head. You might want to just drive it around. You might want to take it to classic meets. You might want to take it to shows. There might be a group of you that you're all into classic cars of a certain era, a certain age, and you all muck in together and buy the cars to go and do that stuff. Now, the final piece, stage 3, really is about building out that calendar of work. What's really important about this bit is that, again, based on the 3 areas of time, effort and cost, the calendar of work allows you to scope out really the length of project, all the bits that you want to do, and the cost that you want to apply to all the bits over a set period of time. And you might want to tackle some of the bigger project fixes at the beginning or some at the end, depending on how you want to approach it. Now, what I mean by calendar of work is also adding in things like location of the car. So for me, I knew a lot of the work I had to do on the car was going to be done on my driveway. It had, I didn't have the luxury of a space of an undercover garage, so I was always going to be battling with the weather and whether it was hot or cold, making sure that I could actually get the work done in the conditions that, the UK weather serves up, which is generally nasty most of the time. So I would say that weather has been a bit of a showstopper for me on my project, just because I've always been doing the work outside. Now, if you're in a better position where you have the car, or you have a location that allows the car to be inside all the time, then you can obviously set better timelines for how you get work completed. When you think about that, you then add all the elements of the parts you want to buy. So when I really looked at my car, I considered the sort of running gears really were the first places I started. Now, I've done a video on this actually where I sort of talked about the three areas of mechanicals, exterior, interior appearances. Now, I went towards the mechanicals as my first stop, really around clutch, flywheel, torque tube, everything that connects to the engine that I knew generally has lasted sort of the 80, 90,000, 100,000 miles. By reconditioning, by putting in again, would give me that, sort of 50,000 plus again out the other end. Now, for me, that was just a peace of mind, because once it's done, and you don't have to worry about it. So they were quite costly when you add them together. Also, when you think about, raising your car in ways to get access to these types of mechanical elements, again, these are considerations of whether you do it or you pay someone else to do it, because some of these items, when you're removing them, can be quite heavy. So again, that, what tools have I got, all of that good stuff. So you can see how everything intrinsically links as you start to think about it. One of the things I really wanted to do as a first step for the exterior was the paintwork, and I think most of the project cars out there will need some sort of paint correction or paint work. I opted for a full respray in the original Copenhagen blue that it left the factory, really because the lacquer had peeled off, and there was elements of the car that just looked pretty tatty. And finally, I wanted to remove the area on the 924 in particular. You have an area that's on the right hand side wing. I just wanted to remove that, and also the plastic stick-on lines that, or stick-on trim that sort of splits the bottom half of the door to the top half of the door, but it actually runs down most of the length of the car. I just wanted to remove that just to give the car more of a sleeker and smoother finish. So again, these are some of the things, as you hear me talk about what I've done with my 924. These are some of the things that you might consider, because if you think those plastic trims are actually a necessity and you like them, then when you take them off, generally most won't survive as you do any type of paint work. A lot of the clips and stuff might be decades old and generally snap off and you need new bits. So these are all the little bits of cost when you think about the level of restoration that you want to go into. So I've experienced a lot of really positive moments as I've gone through the restoration on my car, where I've learned something, I've seen an easy fix, I've been able to acquire parts that have been shared across the VW group. I think with the 924 in particular, you get the option of interchanging some of those VW parts that were basically raided on the parts bin of VW as they built the 924. So I was quite fortunate there. When you look more towards the 944 and the 968, those cars in particular are very much Porsche, and a lot of the bits were developed and designed by Porsche. So there'll be a cost associated with that, but also the ability to find those parts can sometimes be a bit haphazard. I mean, to be fair, Porsche are pretty good with their classic after service care, and they do have a pretty good way of trying to find parts for you if you need them. But also there's a lot of good, what I would call aftermarket Porsche specialists out there who provide parts that can absolutely help you finish any sort of restoration or project work. Now, the final consideration is ultimately, is it worth it? And I think this is where a lot of confusion can lie. As I said right at the beginning of the podcast, you have to remove the word investment from any type of project and restoration, especially on the older Porsche classics. I think there's a view that they are worth some money, and if you scroll the various websites and pages, you will see that they do command quite significant amounts of money. And I'm not talking about the 911, I'm talking about the transaxle Porsches. They have all seen increasing values over the last decade. It's fair to say that they have found a place in the market, and they're pretty sought after now. So as you consider your restoration project, the goals that you want to achieve, really consider which transaxle Porsche that you feel could be right for you. And again, everything that we've touched on today across time, effort, cost, the different stages, whether it's the mechanicals, the appearance externally, the appearance internally, all these things together will help you decide which lucky number Porsche it could be. A 924, a 944, a 968 or a 928. So my final friendly words of advice really is to consider all aspects of what a project or restoration could look like for you, because every car will be different. no matter how much it might look similar, I think every project has its own surprises, its own highs and lows, and fun and frustration. That is the journey that I've been on over the last 4 years with my 924. I think the driving element really for me was to get to a place that I could, finally enjoy the car and know that I could take it out any weekend, really in any weather if I wanted to, and enjoy the driving experience. And that really is at the heart of what Porsche should be about. So if you find yourself in a moment in time where you are considering a project or restoration of a transaxle Porsche, then do take the time to lay out all of those areas that I have gone through today, because in the long run it will help really guide all the efforts that you're prepared to put in and hopefully manage those costs as well. Ideally you get to an end result that you see as the perfect outcome, which ultimately is what we want from all of our projects or restorations, certainly on classic cars. So with that, I hope you've enjoyed today's podcast. I've enjoyed just going through those, elements of consideration as you think about doing any type of project or restoration work. Always think of the outcome that you want to achieve, the time, effort, and cost, and that way, hopefully, you won't have any nasty surprises. But hey ho, that's the joy of classic cars, eh? So thanks for joining me today, and if you are enjoying the podcasts, please do subscribe and please do follow me on YouTube and Instagram, where I'll do a lot of the updates and obviously videos of the restoration that I've done on my 924. So with that, thanks again and look forward to talking to you again soon.